Today's daf is daf mem dalid, and we're up to Omar Mar, which is 3 lines down from the top of the Om. So we mentioned Rav Huna, and Rav Huna said that in a strange situation that arose where she has two ksubos in her possession, one with an earlier date for Masayim Zuz, if she's a basula, and the other with a later date for 300 zuz, meaning a tosefes of 100 zuz. And Rav Huna paskins that in such a case she has a choice. She could either use the first ksuba, in which case she's giving up on that third 100 zuz, but she gets the advantage of being able to collect from the shubadim from the earlier date. Or she has another choice. She can use the second ksuba, in which case she collects an extra 100 zuz, totaling for 300 zuz, but only from the later date. The choice is in her court. She could decide which of the two ksubos she wants to activate. Lema pliga de Rav Nachman. This would seem to be against Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman holds that if a person writes, he's a mocher, he writes two shtare mechira on the same piece of karka to the same buyer, then the second star cancels the first star. And he can no longer use the first star. The first star becomes disqualified completely. And that's against Rav Huna, who says that in the case of two ksubas, she can choose which of the two ksubas. If she wants, she can go for the first ksuba. The Omar of Nachman, shtei shtaros, hayotzim bazeh harzeh. So Ruvain sells the same field twice to Shimon, once with an earlier star, and the other time with the latest star, or he gives a matana to Shimon once and then a second time around. Bitel Sheni as Harishon. According to Rav Nachman, the second star undermines the first star. And by giving the second star, and the lokeach, the buyer, or the recipient of the gift accepts the second star, in doing so, it's a cancellation of the first star. And that's against Rav Huna, who says that even though she accepted two ksubos, she can use, if she so chooses to do so, the first ksuba. And the Gemara rejects this question by saying, Lav mi'itmar alom Rav Papa, u'moder of Nachman di osif be'dikla l'tosefes kaspe. So we're going to stop the Gemara in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a breath, and point out that the way Rav Papa reinterprets of Nachman, it's not automatic and absolute that in all cases the second star nullifies the first star. It all depends. If the second star is an exact duplicate of the first star, then indeed Rav Nachman insists that it nullifies the first star. But if the second star adds something to the first star, then it means that the Kosef Hashtar wanted to give the Baal Hashtar, the recipient of the star, another option, which might work in his behalf and for his benefit. So, for example, the Gemara is going to talk about two shtari mecher and what the second star mecher might add to the first. Hachanami here too ha'osif la midi. The second star that was given by the Baal to the Isha, the second ksuba, adds another 100 zuz. And whenever the second star adds something to the first star, there's no assumption on that part that it negates and cancels the first star, but rather it's giving the recipient of the star an additional leeway for an extra benefit. And now the Gemara is going to study Rav Nachman and what would be a case where the second star adds something to the first star. We had it in the case of Ksuba, where the second star has a Tosefes Ksuba of Amona. Gufam Rav Nachman Shnei Shtaros Hayotzim Bazecher Zebitel Hasheni Es Harichon Rav Papa Umoder of Nachman Di Osif Diklo Tosefes Kaspe. If the second star expands the field only reached this point, and any trees that were beyond that boundary were not included in the sale as far as the first star is concerned. But when he gave him the second star, he expanded the bounds a little bit such that it now incorporates that extra decal. Pshita. Now the Gemara is going to go through various scenarios in which the second star was given after the first star. And in all these scenarios, we're going to analyze whether the second star adds something to the first. Pshita. Harishon b'mecher, v'asheni b'matana. This is wonderful. He gave a second star as a star matana, as I stated. In the star, it says the star matana, which means, we could all dream about this, that the lokeach doesn't have to pay the purchase price that was written and inscribed in the first star. Clearly, the second star is beneficial for the recipient of the star, maybe the makabel matana in this case. Eliapos kochu dekasiv. Not only that, he says the following, that the second star has an advantage over the first star. Just 1 second. Oh, okay, here's what we got. We're going to introduce a new concept, which is fundamental to Masechet Baba Basra, Hilchos Shchenim, which is called Dina de Bar Metra. We're all familiar with that, but let's go over the basics so we could have a chazor. Dina de Bar Metra means that if, let's say, Reuven is selling his field, now Shimon has a contiguous field that borders on Reuven's field. Now, Reuven decides to sell the field to Levi. Levi doesn't own any field in this vicinity. And the Rabbanan made a takana that in this case, Shimon, who's going to lose as a result of the sale to Levi, has rights to object to the sale. What does that mean, object to the sale? He has a right to say to Levi, whatever you paid for that field, I'm going to take the field and I'm going to give you back the money that you spent to pay for the field. So in a sense, when Levi receives a shtar mecher from Reuven, that shtar mecher just 1 second, I got the names mixed up here. One second. But just, I'm sorry, I'm missing one little point. Just 1 second. Okay, now I got it. Levi purchased the field from Reuven. And that purchase has a certain drawback or a legal limitation to it. If Shimon comes by and claims bar mitzvah because he has a field that's contiguous to Reuven's field, Shimon has a right to completely null and void the sale to Levi. Of course, he has to pay him the price that Levi spent on buying the field. But Levi has no right to object to Shimon paying him off and redeeming the field and taking the field for himself. But now Reuven, with a good Yiddish model, he made a very sharp move. And he wrote a second shtar to Levi. And that shtar was a shtar matana. And now Shimon comes along. He says to Levi, get off this field. I'm a bar mitzvah. I have rights to this field. Right? It's all based on the fact that when you plow a field, if you have a contiguous field, it's so much easier and less expensive to plow the field. So the Chachamim made it takana that a bar mitzvah could object and say, I want to buy the field. What do you mean you want to buy the field? I gave that field away for a matana. And a makabel matana is not obligated to a bar mitzvah. Why? Because a makabel matana is going to say, well, I don't have any other options here. I can't get another matana. And that's what it says here. Makabel matana mikavero ein bal mitzer yachol salko bidamim. He can't say, look, I'll pay you off. No. You can't pay him off. So clearly, in this case, pshita, there Rav Nachman's principle that one star cancels the other because it's a duplicate of the first star. So the second star must be coming from the first star. That doesn't apply here in this case, where the second star gives Levi, the Makabal star, a Kabbalas matana that prevents himself, he's not pervious to a claim on behalf of Bar Metzra. Bekolshken, now let's switch it around. Let's say the first star was a star matana. Harishon b'matana v'sheni b'mecher. What's the advantage of receiving a star mecher once you already have a star matana? If you receive a field as a total gift gratis, then you don't have a shibud on the nosein hamatana. What does that mean? Let's take the simple case. Not a case of matana, but a case of mecher. Let's give it names. All right, Steve, you want to volunteer here? If I could sort of give you extra life here. I don't know, your camera. You have to pick up your camera a little bit. All right. I can see now half your. Oh, now I see you. Beautiful. So, Steve, watch the following scenario. You own a field. You also have outstanding debts. You sell me the field, and Rabbi Rhodes comes along and says, wait a minute. You sold a field that's liened to me because I lent you $100,000. And therefore, Rabbi Rhodes has a right to that field, assuming that his loan predates the sale that you sold to me. Steve, you respond to Rabbi Rhodes, look, man, I like you very much. I'd like to pay you up, but I sold the field. So Rabbi Rhodes comes riding over to me on his bicycle, on his motorcycle, and he says, Rabbi Burzon, you're a nice guy, but that field that you bought from Steve Appel Apple was actually mishuba to me. I had a lien on it. So now Rabbi Rhodes kicks me out of the field. What recourse do I have? I go back to you, Steve, and I say, wait a minute, do you have any other fields? I want to collect those fields as a replacement in lieu of the fact that you sold me a field that was confiscated because of your debts. However, if you, Steve, gave me a matana, and now Rabbi Rhodes comes back and says, wait a minute, that field that you received from Steve, the matana was mishubah to me because I had lent him $100,000, and then Rabbi Rhodes confiscates the field, I have no recourse whatsoever as a makabel matana. And therefore, the case of two shtaros, the first of which was a shtar matana, the second was a shtar mecher, the second shtar is miyapa kocho, it gives me, as a makabel ashtar, extra rights at an event that this field that you're giving to me, that you're selling to me, is confiscated by your balchov. I have rights to go back to you and collect from Mishubadim. Ella, so then in what case did Rav Nachman say that the second shtar replaces the first one? Ella ish shneim b'mecher, shneim b'matana. The two shtaros were identical. His bitel hasheni as a rishon. My timer. Why is the second star superior and trumps the first star and nullifies the first star? Rafram Omar. And the Gemara is going to give two explanations with three nafkaminas. Amar oduye odile. You, Steve, gave me the first star. Whatever it was, star matana, star mecher. Now you give me a second star. why did I accept the second shtar? And the answer is, no, let me say it better than this. Steve, why did you write me a second shtar? And the answer is because you know darn well that the first shtar is awesome. It's mezuyah. It's a counterfeit. You were only hoping and dreaming that I would come along and buy your field. But you weren't sure that I was going to buy your field. So you drummed up a shtar, a falsche shtar, and you got somehow your two buddies there, your mafioso buddies there from Chicago, right? That's where they used to have mafiosos in Chicago in those days. Now they're all over the place. And you got them to sign the shtar. But now you realize that you're not going to be able to successfully go through with this purchase and validate it with this shtar. Eventually the truth comes. So you wrote me a second shtar. And now I agreed to buy the field. And there were two Eidim that signed on the field. So basically, what happens is that just one second, that if he accepts the second shtar, just want to make sure I got the names right. No Sanish. Yeah. You see, I have what's called Yada al Helyona. I got the upper hand because I'm holding on to a shtar from you, Steve, that obligates you to fork over the field to me. But why did I accept a second shtar from you? The very fact that I accepted a second shtar from you is proof positive that I confess and I admit that the first shtar is not a good shtar. When I'm called the Baal Shtar, when I produce the second shtar in Bezdin, that's a proof that I was mochel on the shibud that I established through the first shtar. Because otherwise, why am I accepting a second shtar? So the first shtar was a month ago, and now I accept the second shtar. I'm being mochel on the shibud. So any properties that you sold in the last month are no longer accessible to me, are not collectible to me under the law of shibud. My beinayu, 3 nafkaminas. Ika beinayu oruye sahade. Which means that if we go with the first interpretation of Rafram, by accepting the second shtar, I was modeh that the first shtar is mezuyah. And if there are any other shtaros in my possession signed by the same two characters, I can't validate that shtar. Again, as far as the Welt is concerned, those two guys are ksherim. But as far as my admission, which was implicit in accepting the second shtar, I am admitting that the Eidim that signed on the first shtar are Eidim Psulim. Again, we're going to have to assume that there are two different pairs of Eidim over here. Next, Ushlume Peret. What happens if in the last month I've been eating the peros of your field? Well, I bought it. I have rights to eat the peros. No, I didn't buy it because now that I accepted the second shtar, I admit that the first shtar is not valid. If the first shtar is not valid, I had no right to eat your peros for that month, and I got to cough up those peros. Masha'enkin, if I hold like Rav Acha, achuli ochlule l'shibude, that means that really the sale on the earlier date was a valid sale. The shtar is kosher. What does it mean that I took the second shtar? Accepting the second shtar constitutes a mechila on shibudim, but not on the mechira itself. The mechira is mine. The field was mine from the first date, from the first star a month ago, and therefore the peiros are mine. And finally, the third nafkamina, uletaska. We all know what taska is. It's a dirty word, taska. It means, in our contemporary Israeli language, arnona. Who pays for the arnona on a monthly basis to the government? That tax is paid by the owner of the field. And the government gets rich on my back because every month they collect a certain amount of money for my rights to own a field. Well, who owned the field in the last month? According to the first shita, it was yours, Steve, the mocher, because the first shtar was mizuyaf, it was invalid, and the sale is not valid. According to Ravach, the second opinion, however, the sale is a valid sale. All right, I was mochel on shibudim, but as far as taxes, I got to pay the tax. My Havilah de Ksuba, what's the final conclusion about the case of Ksuba? As far as two ksubas that she's holding on to, an earlier ksuba and a later ksuba, and the first ksuba as mono Messiah, the second ksuba as shlosh meils zuz. Tashma di Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmul Mishum Rabbi Elazar ben Shimon Mana u'masayim min ha'eritzim v'tosefes min ha'nesuin. So I made one mistake here, and I want to correct myself. My Havi Allah is not going back to the case of one ksuba and another ksuba, but it's going back to an earlier statement of Rav Huna and a plukta between Rav Huna and Rav Asi. At what moment in time does the shibud nechasim begin as far as ksuba is concerned? Is it from Chas Erisin or is it from Chas Nesuin? And Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel says it depends, excuse me, on whether you're dealing with Ikar Ksuba or Tosefes Ksuba. The Ikar Ksuba, the Shibud is Chal from Shas Erisin, because Rabbanu made a takana that with Erisin, the Baal is Mechuyev in Ksuba, so that's when the Shibud is Chal. However, the Tosefes Ksuba was only given for or under the condition of Nisuin. And therefore the Chachamim say, let's go back to the Din Doraisa. The Din Doraisa is that a Ksuba is only given after Nisuin, after Chuppah. The Rabbanan instituted a Ksuba after Erisin. But when it comes to collecting from the Lekuchas, which means from Shibudim, we go back to the Doraisa halacha, and therefore, even in the case of Ikar Ksuba, which is Mora Besulos, which is written in the Pasuk, and it's Mona Messiah, we will go back to Nesuin, but not earlier than Nesuin, for the Shibud and the collection from Lekuchos from the Shibud. That's how we pass. Okay, Rabbi, so now we start the next mission. Now, I'm hoping that you'll be able to stick around till 2 p.m. It's another 35 minutes, am I correct? Because here, when we start this Mishnah, we're dealing primarily with Motzi Shemra. There's an overlap, to some extent, with the previous sugya that we had in Perikei Lunaris, of the Knas of Onesu Mefuta, but that's only like at the corner of the top. The real thrust of the sugya is about Motzi Shemra, which is a parsha in Kitetse, and we will focus on 3 dimensions of the parsha. Now, let's keep in mind that the parsha of Motzi Shemra addresses the case of a Nara Bisula Shenis Arsa al Yidei Aviyah. And after the marriage, the Baal claims that she had znus during the Erusin period. And his claim is based on the testimony of 2 witnesses to the crime of, we'll call it, immorality. And Motzi Shemra has 2 parts to it. It's like a coin that has heads and tails. One part of Motzi Shemra is that we put this woman and the Boel to death because the Eidim testified that she had this znus of an Eishes Ish. And the flip side of this parsha is that 2 Eidim come to be mazim the first 2 Eidim, and we believe the mazimim against the zomimim, and the husband is now chayav under the law of Motzi Shemra, because he brought these Eidim to substantiate his claim that she had znus, and now there are Eidim zomim to prove that it was a false claim, and the Torah says that the Motzi Shemra will get malchus, he will pay a fine of mea soim, and that's about it. But if instead of Eidim Mazimim, we only have the Eidim of the Baal, then she gets put to death. I mean, including the Baal, of course, but she gets put to death. And the Torah says the following. I'll read the psalm. Ki yeh nara b'sula morasa le'ish, u'mitza'a ish ba'ir v'shachav ima, v'otzeisem eshneim el shar ha'ir ahu, u'skaltem osam ba'avanim v'mesim. So we want to emphasize that the punishment that we're going to focus our attention on here is, number 1, skila, for nara murasa shizinsa, and number 2, the skila is going to take place in the public area called the Shar Ha'ir. However, the Eidim came to testify that she had this nus while she was in Arusa. Now that might sound like a secondary point, but please emphasize that. Now the Torah tells us, a little bit earlier in the same parsha in Dvarim Chav Beis, the emes hoya dover zelo nitzu b'sula sum lenara motzios hanara Pesach Beis Avia. It's no longer Pesach Hashar, but Pesach Beis Avia. Uskalua bav anshe ira bavanim meis. So she gets skewed. Same identical punishment as far as Arba Mises Bezdin. Ki asa nevola b'Yisrael liznos Beis Avia. The Torah wants to make a public statement here about something that we don't know about. And that public statement is that she had this nus while she was still in Beis Avia. We don't know about that because the girl now is already a Nesua. Nesua means she leaves the Rishus of a father. She's in the Rishus of the Baal. So to publicly demonstrate that the substance of the Eidos was that she had a Znus relationship before Nesuin, we're going to do the skila on the front porch of the father, which is called in the Torah's language Pesach Beis Aviyah, to publicly note that this nus took place when she was still in Beis Aviyah. If the Edom had come during the time that she was in Beis Aviyah, meaning before Nisuin, we don't need to publicize that everybody knows she's still in Beis Aviyah. So we need to make a public demonstration of Znus, the terrible, terrible catastrophe of Znus, and therefore we go out to the Shar Ha'ir. Now, both of these cases refer to a Nara Shezinsa. If, on the other hand, she was already, a Nara Arusa Shezinsa. If, on the other hand, she was already a Nara Hanesua Shezinsa, then she gets Chen. Forget about skew. And that's based on a pasuk again over there. It says, "Ki matzei ish ochevim isha b'ulas pal u'meisu gam shneim," and stam misa. The Gemara says Sanhedrin Pei Dalet is chenek. Whenever it says misa, it means chenek. Okay. Now, all this was one side of a two-sided coin, namely when the Eidim testified that she had snus. Now we go to the flip side, when there are Eidim mazimim, and the Eidei Abal turned out to be Eidim Zomimim, and therefore the Baal is chayav under the law of Motzi Shemra. And he gets Malchus, and he pays a very stiff fine of 100 soyin. And in the parsha of Motzi Shemra, we have to focus on one key word that appears over and over again. And that is the word Yisrael. For example, it says, "V'yonshu oso mea kesef v'nosnu le'avia nara ki hotzi shemra al besulas Yisrael." Later on, it says again, "Ki asasa devola bi Yisrael." And our sugi is going to want to know, why does it emphasize Yisrael? Yisrael is opposed here to a Gioris. And the Torah is telling me that in the Parsha Motzi Shemra, which means that for your libel, you're going to get Malchus and pay Me'asah. That's because she's a Bas Yisrael, which is otherwise called Hora'asa V'leidasa B'Kedusha. However, if she was not a Bas Yisrael, not a pedigree, she's a Giores, then it's going to divide up into 3 subdivisions. You could have a case where, let's call her Christina, undergoes Gerus. Now she becomes Sarah, and she has a little child. After her Gerus, that child is called Leidasa, Horasa v'Leidasa B'Kedusha, and the Parsha Motzi Shemra goes into effect. Now we can have another case. Christina is pregnant, and she's Miskayeres. She goes into the mikvah. We have now in the Vlad, when the Vlad is born, Hora'aso Shalo B'Kedusha v'Leidasa B'Kedusha. Now we have a third scenario. And that is when Christina undergoes Gerus. As Sarah, she takes a child from a previous marriage, right? And she's Megayer the child. That's called Hora'aso v'Leidasa Shalo B'Kedusha. So now let's learn the Mishnah. Hagioresh and his Gaira Bita Ima. So that means it was Horasa V'Leidasa Shalo B'Kedusha. Vizinsa. Okay, she grew older, and she has a cheskes besula. But as a Nara Morasa, she was Mizan. So again, we're not yet up to the case of where there were Eidim Hamazimim. Right now, there are no Eidim Hamazimim. There's only the Eidis that testifies that as a Nara Murasa, she had Znus. Ein lo Pesach Beis Ha'av velo Me'asa. Because the parsha of Pesach Beis Avia is embedded in the parsha of what? Of Motzi Shemra. And there it says that after the Nisuin, we will put her to death the Pesach Beis Avia, and that's not going to apply to this case of Hora'asa V'leidosa Shlo B'Kedusha. If, on the other hand, there were Eidim Hamazimim, we will not impose the punishment on the Baal of Motzi Shemra of Mea Kesef, Mea Sela, because she was not a Bas Yisrael. She didn't have neither Hora or Leida B'Kedusha. Now we talk about a pregnant woman, Christina, who comes to be Mitzkayer. And the Gerus is Chal not only vis-a-vis Christina, but also vis-a-vis her daughter. But she was Horasa Shalo B'Kedusha. She's not really a Bas Yisrael. Harei Zo B'Skila. It's true that she'll get Skila, which is the punishment for a Nara Murasa Shizitza. But V'yein lo Pesach Beis Av v'lo Mea Sela. Meaning, if there are no Eidim Azimim, and we rely on the first pair of Eidim, she doesn't have that separate halacha Beis Av. And if there were Eidim Hamazimim, the husband who's a Motzi Shemra does not pay Mea Sela. And why? Because it was Hora'asa Shalo B'Kedusha. Hoisa Hora'asa V'leidosa B'Kedusha. If, on the other hand, Christina underwent Gerus, then she became pregnant, and then she gave birth, that's Hora'asa V'leidosa B'Kedusha. Harei hi Bas Yisrael L'chol Dvareh. Even though the mother's a Gerus. So that means that if the Baal was Motzi Shemra, they were Eidim Zomimim, then she gets Skila B'Pesach Beis Avia if she's still a Nara. And if, on the other hand, there were Eidim Hamazimim, and the Baal is Chai B'Shum Motzi Shemra, he'll pay Mea Sela. Yeshla Av, the Eila Pesach Beis Av. She has a father, but he has no home. He's a homeless guy. Yeshla Pesach Beis Av, the Eila Av, or the reverse. There is a Pesach Beis Avia, but unfortunately, her father already died. It's Harezu B'Skila. Nevertheless, she gets Skila. In the Shara Ir, obviously, there's no Pesach Beis Av. Shlo Nemar Pesach Beis Av El Mitzvah. So even though there's no possibility of Pesach Beis Av, that's only a mitzvah. But as far as the Misa is concerned, she gets the Misa of Skila.